welcome back. Today we're going to get into our academic readings that will help us write about the early decades of modern conservatism. We're going to read the first chapter of a book by David Farber, and each chapter in this book focuses on a single person. So this first chapter focuses on Senator Robert Taft, the son of former U.S. president during the Progressive era. So Taft the senator is known as one of the fathers of modern conservatism. And he's someone that's often overlooked in history textbooks, in part because he never won the Republican nomination for president. And it wasn't for lack of trying. He tried several times. But he's important because as a senator, he becomes famous for fighting against the New Deal and then developing important conservative legislation in the post-World War II years. So let's set up this chapter to help you look for important stuff that you'll need in the eventual assignment. An important question for this week is to figure out what were the core ideas behind conservatism. And in the assignment, you'll need to identify what conservatives believed in from the 1930s, really through the early 1960s. So as you read, look for those key ideas of early modern conservatism. And so one of the things that I try to do for you here is actually start a little bit before the chapter and get in the introduction, because in the introduction, Farber lays out some of those kind of core ideas of what he thinks are there in conservatism. So I hope that it's going to help you a little bit. And then he continues to do that once we get into the actual chapter on Robert Taft. And so another big question that you're going to have to answer is, when should we start this new chapter, this new section for a chapter? And it's no secret that that Farber sees the origins of modern conservatism in the 1930s during the New Deal. It's a political ideology that rises to combat the rising popularity of modern liberalism and the New Deal. And so you might assume that those terms, liberalism and conservatism, have always meant the same thing throughout American history, but they haven't. And so Farber explains in this chapter, for example, how Franklin Roosevelt transformed the meaning of the word liberal itself, right? And that's an important piece of information that you need. And so I want to make sure that you don't skip over that. If you're reading too quickly, you might miss the part of this chapter where Farber outlines that story. And so I just want to show you exactly where it is so you don't skip over it. And so in the PDF, it's on page 16. But if you're looking at the actual page number in the reading, in the book that we're reading from, it's page 18. And so it starts at the bottom where Franklin Roosevelt's giving his acceptance speech in June 1936 at the Democratic Convention. And he really, in that speech, completely changes the meaning of the word liberal. And it's in reaction to that that Farber explains that the word kind of conservatism comes into popular meaning. And so you want to read this section in particular because it's a really good story that you might want to bring in to the textbook when you're writing that new section. But it's also just important for you to understand that liberalism, the meaning of liberalism and conservatism, completely changed in this decade in the 1930s. So finally, the other thing that I want you to look for here are, any conservative political or legal victories that Farber talks about here. This early period that we're reading about is a period when liberalism starts to dominate the political landscape. Franklin Roosevelt wins the presidency 4 times before he dies in 1945. It's a period when politics in the U.S. changes dramatically as the federal government expands its power and role. So people like Taft that you're reading about here are really fighting in the minority. And so you also have to think about political parties differently. This is a decade, this is decades before conservatives start to dominate the Republican Party. And so they're really at the margins, even in the Republican Party at this time. And so, the success the Republicans start to have in the post-World War II period largely depends on Republicans accepting much of the New Deal. So people who are against the New Deal, the conservatives who are against the New Deal, are really in the margins of the Republican Party. So just to give you a taste of just how marginal they are during this period, I'll give you something that's not in the readings for this week. This comes from a letter that Dwight Eisenhower, the famous Republican president who served in the 1950s, writes to his brother in 1954 about conservatives. And this is what he writes. Should any political party attempt to abolish Social Security, unemployment insurance, and eliminate labor laws and farm programs, you would not hear of that party again in our history. There is a tiny splinter group, of course, that believes you can do these things. Among them are H.L. Hunt and a few other Texas oil millionaires, and an occasional politician or businessman from other areas. Their number is negligible, and they are stupid. Right, so here's the leader of the Republican Party in 1954 calling conservatives stupid, right? It gives you a sense of just how marginal this conservative movement is during this period before they really take control of the Republican Party in the 1970s and 1980s. Right, so it's important to remember that Republican doesn't necessarily mean conservative during the period that we're talking about, because conservatives had yet to really take over the party. Still, conservatives are able to win some victories, and they're laid out here in the chapter. And we want to be able to identify those when we write our assignment. And in particular, as you're getting towards the end of this reading, look for the Taft-Hartley bill, which Robert Taft is one of the sponsors of the bill. It's one of the most important pieces of legislation and conservative victories in the post-World War II period. And it's something that really should go, that you really want to kind of focus on when we get to writing this chapter. So if you have any questions about the reading, remember that you can always email me. And also, if you're interested in just any subject that we're reading about and just want to talk more about it or learn more about it, you can always set up a time to talk with me.